Welcome to Grappling with a Gray, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making to help us more clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Jonas Milson, and I would like to welcome my guest today. With me is Catherine Fitzgerald, who is a speaker, writer, certified coach, and founder of Brass Tacks with Heart Executive Coaching. She works with founders and their leaders as they navigate the choppy waters of aligning people, performance, and profits. Stewart Wiggins joins us from Paris. He is chief advisor at Induna Advisors, working to significantly increase company revenue by developing positive client reports and establishing solid business relationships. And Kimi Hirotsu Ziemski is founder of KSP Partnership, providing project management and project leadership courses and workshops to improve team dynamics and communications. Thank you all for being with me again. And here
Absolutely.
is today's ethics challenge. The tragic air crash of January 29th over Washington, D.C., followed 2 days later by a second crash over Philadelphia, has left us all feeling both heartbroken and decidedly less safe. According to the Associated Press, National Transportation Safety Board member Todd Inman expressed frustration that accidents like these occur, noting that the board has made, quote, several hundred recommendations to improve aviation that have not been acted upon. Understaffing may have contributed to the disaster. The FAA has long struggled with a shortage of air traffic controllers. Responding to reports that the helicopter was flying 100 feet higher than regulations allow, President Donald Trump declared that diversity initiatives have left air traffic control understaffed and underqualified, thereby compromising air safety. According to some reports, airlines have indeed lowered standards to meet a pilot shortage. Others argue that the shortage of applicants has nothing to do with DEI. Either way, there does seem to be a looming crisis concerning air travel safety. That's not only pilots. Police, firefighting, healthcare work, and teaching are all facing potential staffing shortages. Reasons include poor pay, unsafe working conditions, and unreasonable demands on the job. The problem seems obvious, and the potential consequences seem clear. So what are we doing about it? Is it possible that DIE is a contributing factor? And even if it is the topic so polarizing that it interferes with our addressing other root causes that won't be dealt with because of political acrimony? The floor is open.
I'm going to go ahead and jump in.
Please do.
And Stuart and Catherine both, since I trust you both in terms of integrity of data, please don't hesitate to correct me if I am quoting this incorrectly. It is my understanding that 50% of the applicants to become air traffic controllers can't even make it through the first cut of testing. So I don't believe that that speaks to lax. I believe that that speaks to a level of rigor and a level of seriousness that is embedded in the onboarding process. It also tends to take between 2 and 6 years for many of the safety positions in the FAA to become fully certified. After 2 years of training, they are then shadowed on the job by a more senior officer, and some never become fully certified, content to stay at a slightly lower level, but that's of both pay and seniority. This isn't a problem that has occurred over the period of 2, 3, or 4 years when you talk about those kinds of time frames and those kinds of parameters for onboarding. And I don't think, as someone who used to commute by plane, as Catherine probably maybe still does, um, I don't think I want them to loosen those. I don't think I want them to suddenly decide, oh, some of these questions really don't. No. So, I think the topic, and that's just one of the slices of the types of jobs and the professionals that you had mentioned. That's just one. So these aren't issues that can be solved in a 6 month or a 3 month study.
There was actually a report that the traffic controller in the Washington case was actually doing two different jobs because they didn't have enough people. So then
That
it's
would
not
not
even speaking
surprise
to
me.
competence. He might have been the best of the best, but you still, when you're asking people to do more than they should reasonably be expected to do, you're still setting them up for failure.
And enormous consequences.
Yeah.
It's difficult
Absolutely.
to it's difficult to put your finger on it and say, yes, this is exactly it. A couple of things that I'd just like to put out to the group. Um, Ever since Ronald Reagan fired all the air traffic controllers, they've struggled to maintain full staffing within that group.
I forgot.
And then when you factor in this hyperbole that's out there that the standards have been reduced, the only standards that's been reduced is in lower level support roles. It's not the actual air traffic controllers where the standards have been reduced. That would make no sense. So, as we talk about, cutting the wheat and the chaff and getting through to the truth, the truth is that like there's qualified people. That is in fact probably why there was only one controller there that night, because there were two there. One asked to leave early. And that would have been completely transparent to us if not for the accident. And that probably happens all the time, where somebody says, I have to go because I have to go to a soccer game, whatever. That it doesn't make any difference. The problem with these accidents is, first thing we want to do is we want to find blame. Whose head are we going to get? Who are we going to blame and say, it's your fault? Okay? There's a reason why they call them accidents. So just let me put this out here to the group. Aviation travel is still the safest thing you can do, particularly in the United States. Okay? And if you look at all the planes that take off any given day and fly, and how few accidents there are, yeah, I I could probably sit down and tell you what the number is, or look it up, go to Chat GPT and tell you what the number is, but it's safer than getting in a car and driving up to the grocery store. So yeah, are there
In
opportunities?
my neighborhood, significantly safer.
Well, there you go. There you go. So, I mean, so I'm going to say that yes, there's opportunities for improvement, and but let's not try to roast somebody. Just one final thing. We talk about the helicopter pilot, and I don't know whether it's going to come up in this discussion, but it was a classified mission. They trained for classified missions, and having been in the military, I will tell you, you train the way you're going to fight. So if there's an argument out there that says they didn't have their night vision goggles on, I would bet my last dollar that they had their night vision goggles on. Now, if in fact the pilot was 100 feet higher than what they should have been, I don't know. But the fact remains is you train the way you're going to fight, and there was an accident. But let's not go headhunting for everybody that might have been involved.
I have to agree with both of you in terms of, finding blame or revisiting the criteria of hiring as a point of reference to say that, the quality is lower than standard, or that we don't have high enough standards, or to that effect, is a long-term evaluation, not a 3-month evaluation. And accidents do happen, and certainly no one intended for all of this to happen. I guess I kind of, when I read it, had a couple of different thoughts. And the first one is values and priorities. And in my world, safety should be at the top of the list. Not that DEI is not important or is not something that I absolutely, equity is always at the forefront of my mind. But in a situation where we are all human beings, our shared humanity and the value of safety for all has to be at the top of the list. And I look at the way things were announced on both sides of the fence, and I mean the polarizing political fence that we live in. I really was disappointed that DEI was even brought up, to be honest with you. I feel like it's a Molotov cocktail to the other side and it just inflames people and we lose our humanity in those moments. And so for me, I'm ill qualified to comment about what, why, how, or who is responsible, nor do I really think that it's a valid conversation. Certainly knowing what happened so we can prevent it in the future is very, very important. But I look at it more in terms of the way we deal with each other. And as human beings, when are we going to prioritize our humanity over everything else? And, that ability to empathize and, look at one another with compassion and grace. And I use that word grace in my world. That means giving them space and means looking at them and realizing that neither of us is perfect. We do the best we can with what we have in the moment. And if we assume the best in those situations, our grief should be at the top of the list after this. I can't imagine what those families are going through. And, if I hear one more time that we've, recovered 55 bodies and we're still, searching for the others, and I think, we're ignoring the reality of what happened to the balance of those people and the reason they haven't found their bodies. And, how absolutely excruciating for a mother and father or for a spouse or, anyone that is impacted by this. And that's where my heart goes.
Well, you touched on
I,
quite a few points there, Catherine.
mhm.
But in particular, what really strikes me is, and it comes up again and again and again, especially in these ethical discussions, is how we turn every issue and every problem and every headline into a political melee.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
it doesn't seem as if the intent is to solve the problem. It's to beat the other side into submission and destroy their credibility, which, as you say,
or make sure that we're not blamed. We made all these recommendations, and I noticed there was no discussion of whether or not those recommendations have been fully reviewed and found to be viable. But no, they made hundreds of them. So the very first thing that they did was essentially
Lead
say,
with the
oh, by the way,
defense.
that's not us. It's not us. We did our level best. You guys fell down on the job. And that's, to Catherine's point, that is the epitome. That is the best example of what a lack of grace and humanity looks like. And very
Mm-hmm.
disappointing.
It is. And I think we've come to this place where I have to be right and you have to be wrong instead of, that statement, agreeing to disagree, has just been vacuumed out of our conversations, in the world, our interactions. It's my way or the highway. And it is extremely hard or difficult for those of us who really want to provide space and grace for every individual to have their own opinion and have a right to it. And then understand that, all of us have a life that impacts our everyday experiences, our family of origin, our education, our workplace environment, all of the things that we have in our lives that impact our view of the world. And if we recognize that we're doing the best we can, but nobody knows. And I have said this so many times the last few days, none of us are promised tomorrow. We only have today. And when you look at it and you think every single day, I want to be the best version of myself, which is someone who allows others to have space and grace and their own opinion and a right to express it. That's what this country was built on, in my opinion, was people were tired of being, shoved down and told they couldn't do things the way they wanted to do them. So here we are in this land of the free, and yet we are bounding people up and not allowing everyone that right. Neither side.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because I've done a lot of different things throughout my life, civilian, in the military, and there's been things that went right, thankfully, more often than not, and there's been things that have gone wrong. But at no point in the discussion or the investigation did the question come up, what was the race? What was the gender? That wasn't even factored in. It was just a fact-finding mission. So I'm listening to this talk, and I'm wondering, when did this assignment of blame based on the difference of a person, that suddenly that's the reason why there was an issue? Because it's certainly not on an accident report that I've ever filled out or ever.
No, it's not.
So when did this take place? And not just when did it take place, when did it become so mainstream that, I mean, like, well, we got to find out, well, there was they hired a black guy, and the black guy's his vision's not that good. And then people don't think that fast. So I'm sure that was the problem, I mean, those are the kind of things that get into but into the thinking of certain segments of the population. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
so that's why you have this whole DEI and this woke. There's no such thing as woke or DEI. It's just doing the right thing. That's all.
That's what I was raised with, that's for sure.
I used to
Kind of
teach a
it.
diversity class, and one of the things I remember about that diversity class was the one thing we all have in common is our differences. And everybody embraced it. Everybody embraced it. But I'd venture to say you can't really say that now in mixed company, because you don't know who's going to get upset and excited about it.
Well, and one of the most famous and ringing statements by Martin Luther King is, waiting for the day when we'll be judged by the content of our character. And it seems like we're farther from that now than we were then.
Absolutely.
This weaponization of identity.
And demonizing of the opposing opinion, no matter the situation. And I think that when you say, we are accepting of other people's differences in, the way we were raised, it was to be open-minded. But then there's people that, are raised in an environment that's very narrow and very confining and very, I'm good, you're bad, kind of polarizing in the way they are raised. And it's difficult to swallow. It's difficult to come in, connect with someone who has such strong opinions and be respectful of their perspective, their life experience, their ignorance, their whatever it is that is driving that, their prejudice. But if we focus on the fact that we all, breathe and we are all human, we all have a brain and we all have a heart, and we may not understand what has brought them to this point in their life, and we may never. And yet to tangle with them or to try to judge them brings us on the same level. It may not be my choice, and it may not be something that I respect in terms of a value in my life. And I can feel compassion or sorrow or, go a different direction, choose to, segregate myself from that because it's not my way. But to cast judgment or to try to convince or corral someone and antagonize them in some way, it's not healthy. And when was the last time any of us wanted to be told what to do and how to think? None of us.
The bottom line is it doesn't fix anything. It
Right.
doesn't move anything forward. It just lets us wallow in and continue in our problems.
Mm-hmm.
I
Kimi,
think
thoughts? Haven't heard from you, Kimi. You still percolating?
she muted.
I don't know.
Kim, if you hear us, raise your hand.
Oh, well, she says her sound has gone out. So we'll let her fix that. Stuart, you were
Oh.
gonna make your comment.
No, Catherine said the word prejudice, and I think that, if you break that word down, prejudge, then she went on to talk about, what brings a person to a point where they prejudge. It's interesting because when I can remember as a child, I would hear some kids say some things, and I didn't even know if they were what they meant. And because I never heard my parents really talk like that. And so, to your point, Catherine, people are a product of their environment. They may not understand what that result is, but they are a product of their environment. But there are lots and lots of people that overcome that,
Mm-hmm.
and those are the people that we have to, I don't want to say embrace, but consider. People, I think people are fearful of people that are different. That's why, sometimes in hiring, people are most comfortable around people who are like themselves, and it's just a statement of fact.
Sure, absolutely.
And so you have to accept that as part of the hiring process. People talk about DEI. Well, if people didn't feel comfortable about being around people that were like themselves, then you probably wouldn't need to have DEI because then you'd know that the process was fair. Well, not always is that process fair, and that's just the way it is. I mean, each of us, this is a diverse group here. Each of us have probably experienced something that maybe we didn't get a fair look because we didn't look like the person who was in this part of the decision making. But
Mm-hmm.
that's okay because I don't mean to put too fine a point on it, but that's the way life is. It wasn't meant to be. There was a better cliche. It wasn't meant to be. There's a better opportunity. I can remember as recently as maybe 15 years ago. I had talked to a guy on the phone about a job 3 times. He invites me to drive an hour away to meet him for dinner. He hasn't seen me yet. The guy walks into the restaurant. I put my hand up because he told me what he's going to have on, and he sees it's me. All the blood rushed from his face. Suddenly, he wasn't hungry, had to leave, couldn't have dinner with me. I wonder what that could have been. But I said, well, I'm gonna eat. So I made him because he was picking up the tab. So I made him stay and watch me eat. But I never heard from him again without ever hearing any reason why. Now this guy loved me for 3 phone calls, but because of the sound of my voice, he really couldn't pinpoint who or what I was. But he thought I was more like him than less like him. But the fact is, I might have been more like him in terms of work ethic and the ability to get the job done. And that was probably 15 years ago.
It triggered me to think about something that my parents instigated, and I was, the pawn in the game, and that is that I was in third grade, and so 1972, and my parents signed me up for voluntary busing. And so I was bused from my neighborhood to the west side of Fresno, which is primarily African American. And I went to a school where I was the minority, a single busload of white kids that went to the west side. And my teacher, who was also African American and had freckles, and you can't really see, but I had really redhead little girl freckles when I was little. And so when we met the very first time, I said, we both have freckles. And it was one of the best experiences of my life in terms of I made two very dear friends who also are African American and or Black. I don't know what the politically correct statement
It
is,
shouldn't even matter.
but
It
people
shouldn't
of
even matter,
color.
really.
But Kyla and Yolanda, and I was only there for that year. Well, then I went to a high school that was very integrated in my neighborhood by the time I got there, and Yolanda showed up, and we got to see each other again as high school students and be friends during that time. And we've remained friends on Facebook. But it was one of the funniest things. They had a dance after school one day in the third grade, and I got to stay because my mom was going to come pick me up. And I remember it like it was yesterday. They said to me, you dance better than any white girl we've ever spent time with. I thought, I love this, in looking at my life backwards, what an incredible gift they gave me, because it wasn't, listening to all these other things. It was just experiencing it with that childlike acceptance that, oh, your skin, I always wanted to be tan and was never tan. And so I was very envious of their pigment in their skins. And, it just doesn't, it left an impression on me that we are all human beings first. And it sticks with me in every conversation. I recognize, okay, there's things that all of us have experienced as children that may shape who we are today in different ways, positive or negative. And I have to be, cognizant of accepting people where they are.
Amy, are you back with us?
Yes, I am.
Oh, good.
I wanted to apologize, by the way, for the disruption. It is when people lack that sensibility of respecting each other that we end up being a very vicious version of the old joke about the people who are trying to figure out what this thing was, and they were without sight, and one person says, well, I think it's a tree, it must be a forest. I've got tree trunks. And somebody else says, no, 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 it's a wall. It's massive and it's a wall. And somebody else says, no, I think it's a fire hose of some kind. It's a hose of some kind. It's very flexible and big. And they're describing an elephant because they're describing it simply from their own experience of that elephant. And then if you are able to see, and all of a sudden you see all of these parts come together to be sort of all of it, but definitely not only what any one person has experienced. Unfortunately, in a world where there is a very quick reaction to, well, you're out of your mind. I don't know where you got that idea. As opposed to, okay, I hadn't thought of it from that perspective. Now what we have is the tree trunk person is yelling and screaming at the wall person saying, have you lost your mind? Are you out absolutely insane? And what do you mean a hose? In the meantime, the poor fellow who was at the very back of the animal is holding on to a tail thinking, I think they're all crazed. It's a skinny, flexible thing. What? What are they all talking about?
So it all comes down to
And they're
communication, because the truth is we are all blind. None of us can see the whole picture. And if we
Exactly.
communicate with each
no.
other, then collectively, I mean, that's, when I give my presentations, that's what diversity is all about. It's diversity of perspective, of interpretation,
Experience.
experience, background, everything. And then collectively, we're all smarter than any of us if we're
Well, I
willing.
also want to point out if we're willing to listen.
Yeah.
And in order to solve the problems, many of which have been rather self-evident for a very long time. But in order to solve them, people have to be willing to solve, in some cases, a part of the problem they do not believe to be the critical part. And as a matter of fact, they still can't figure out how that particular part of the problem was even seen to begin with, because they don't view it as, quote, part of the problem. So we have to be willing to let someone else's prioritization, let somebody else's perspective overrule our own in the interest of actually attacking the problem. If we attack it from the middle instead of the right or the left, if we attack it from a 30-degree angle instead of an 85-degree angle, we need to attack the problem. And it should matter less what our, forgive the bad joke, what our angle of attack is. Pilots all over the place are going, my God, they let that woman talk in public. But it should matter less what the angle of attack is than the fact that we're together attacking the problem. And I think that is my answer to the question you had posed. If we know that there are problems, if we knew that there were problems and we knew that there were ways of solving it, why haven't we done it? I believe that's why we haven't done it, because we aren't coming from that perspective of grace and respect. We aren't saying, hey, what are your capacities? What are your capabilities? We're saying, who's to blame here? What didn't go right? As opposed to a number of things that, you know, didn't go wrong.
And that's a
You
learned
know,
response. I mean, Catherine, you reminded me of my own childhood story when I told my mother I wanted to have my friend Mark over after school. And she was picking us up. And I said, well, he gets up out a few minutes before I do, so he might be there first. My mother said, well, how will I recognize him? I said, I'll tell him to wear a red shirt. I neglected to mention that Mark was black in an almost all white school, because in the first grade, that was just an irrelevant detail.
yeah.
And
Like
never even,
how tall are you? How short are you?
yeah, it never even occurred to me to describe him in that way. And to the point you were making earlier, Stuart, any of you are familiar with Daryl Davis? Um, he's a Grammy-winning musician who has a TED Talk that is a must-watch.
I'll have to
Probably
check
has
it
at least
out.
15 million views by now.
Look at you.
But he grew up in international families, army bases, and going to other countries. And he went to these schools where they're foreign nationals. And so everybody's different in every conceivable way. And they moved back to the States when he was fairly young, 8, 9, 10 years old. And he was in some sort of a school parade. And people started throwing things from the crowd. And his teachers shielded him, and he couldn't understand what was happening. He had no understanding that he was the target of this. And when he got home, he told his parents what happened, and they said, well, that's because you're black. And he said he refused to believe his parents. He said it made absolutely no sense to him that anyone would dislike him without knowing who he was. And he said it took him some time before he realized. He went on to engage the imperial wizard of the Ku Klux Klan in conversation and actually befriended him, not to have discussions about race, not to debate him, but simply to let him learn what it's like to know a black man. And if you don't want me to spoil the end of the story for you, you can mute me right now. But at the end of his talk, he reaches in a closet and he pulls out the KKK uniform of the Imperial Wizard who left the Klan and renounced it. And he's caused hundreds of Klansmen to leave the Klan, not through debate, not through race discussion, but simply get to know me as a human being, and you will discover that your entire worldview is skewed. And that really speaks to your whole point about our humanity. If we want to recognize the humanities of others, it's right there. But we also have to make it easy for people to recognize our humanity.
Exactly.
Because there's so
And
much unwillingness to do that now.
if I may, it doesn't, there's also a certain level of honorable acceptance that should be in place when I was very young. It didn't feel that young at the time, but it does now. When I was very young, somebody asked me, she goes, "Well, wow, you really like spaghetti and meatballs." And I said, "Yes." She said, "Well, it is an all-American dish." And I said, "Yeah, but I'm Japanese American. I'm a fourth generation American of Japanese descent." She goes, "Not really. You're just Kimi." And I know that you come from a Japanese heritage, but I hadn't really thought that had anything to do with spaghetti and meatballs. And I had to laugh because there, right there, was someone who absolutely knew who I was, absolutely understood the impact of that part of my identity and being it as it being important, and also kind of looked at the situation and says, "Gosh, what does that have to do with anything?" You know, that acceptance is hard won sometimes as adults, and sometimes it's hard won when we were children. Um, it's a fine line that we sometimes have to tread to honor the parts of someone else who are different from what we ourselves hold, and at the same time, within that balance and integration of all these different ideas, remember that at heart, we're just people, but we are people with different perspectives and guidelines. Um, I'm going to tell a story on our dear friend here. I'm a hugger, and I did not realize, and bless his heart, I came over to him and he said, "Oh, Kimi, that's right. You might not know this. You're not a woman of my family, and so we kind of don't hug." And I said, "Oh my God." And I was appalled at my own bad manners because part of me said, "Gosh, you really should have thought about whether or not that was acceptable." Because there are people who do not have that faith-based reason for it. They just can't believe this little ball of something is barreling towards them with their arms wide open. It's sort of like, good Lord, where is she coming from? Um, but that never paused our friendship, not even for a scintilla of a heartbeat. It
And
was just,
when
oh,
you
okay.
say, Kimi, that you should have been sensitive, I don't really think so. That's something that in our culture has become so normative. I was at a conference and I met a woman who has become a very, very good friend of mine that we met the first time in person, and she's been on the show before several times, and we met in person at a conference, and she saw me and she jumped up and ran over and threw her arms around me. I didn't shove her away. I didn't give her a lecture. I waited for later, and I said, by the way, she said, oh, I'm so sorry. I said, don't be
You
sorry.
know,
It's okay. When I'm forced to, I will identify myself as what the media call the ultra orthodox. And I always phrase it that way because ultra orthodox is not a term that we came up with.
I was gonna say,
I was
doesn't
gonna
Orthodox
say.
cover it?
Yeah,
see.
it really doesn't, but that's a longer discussion. But occasionally people will say, "Really? I never would have
So I have to
guessed."
ask you, if you were in France, because in France, people greet each other with a kiss
Sure.
on the cheeks.
I mean, both cheeks.
Both
Yeah.
cheeks, yeah. So, would that be offensive? I mean, because males too. So, like, if you came to France and I saw you and I proceeded to want to give you a kiss on the cheeks, would you be offended?
As a male, you definitely would not offend me. As a female would be a little more uncomfortable than a hug.
Right.
But there are members of my community who do not shake hands with women. And there are differences among the authorities about under what circumstances. Many authorities say in a business setting or a formal setting, there's no problem with a handshake because that's not meant to be affectionate. And I've
Right.
sort of had this conversation about the French kissing hello. That's the French handshake. And my goodness, where did I go?
Oh no.
I may be
Your
gone for good. Can you hear me?
camera.
I can
We can hear
you.
you.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, I guess we'll. Oh, there we go.
Oh, there you are. You're back.
We'll see how long that lasts. That's a French handshake.
Hmm.
So you could really debate, is that considered a sign? Is that considered affectionate, or is it just a local formality?
It's a local
Mhm.
formality.
And I don't
There's
spend much time in France, so it doesn't come up very often.
Right.
lot of kissing going on, but it's just like it's a handshake, you know?
I'm gonna take us back one step and just in that what Kimi was describing and what you, Jonason, were describing
Catherine,
about our.
can I ask you to hold that thought until we go to the next
Sure.
segment?
Oh, sure.
We're about at the limit of our first segment time here.
Absolutely.
So those of you who are on the edge of your seats waiting to hear what what wisdom she is going to instill, then
As we all do.
if you are a premium member, you can be part of that conversation. And go to my Substack, and you can find out there how to become part of that. But for the rest of you, if you're watching or listening, we're going to break here. If you have a topic that you would like us to take up at some point in the future, please go to my website, ethicsninja.com. Use the contact information. Leave your idea. If it's compelling, we will use it for a future show. So for now, Catherine Fitzgerald, Stewart Wiggins, Kimi Hirotsu Ziemski, thank you all for your insights, your wisdom, your passion, and your civil discourse. Delighted for this conversation. And until next time, as always, we encourage you to continue grappling with the gray.